She walked down the aisle in a dress sewn with 1,000 prayers, holding a bouquet that hid a weapon. On her wedding day, as her groom smiled with lies on his tongue, Sa made a choice that would silence the crowded church and shatter her world to build a new one. This is not a story of a bride left at the altar. This is the story of a woman who left him there, armed with a secret recording of his ultimate betrayal. Watch as Sa transforms her heartbreak into an unbreakable shield, using the very words meant to destroy her to reclaim her life, protect her unborn child, and ignite a movement of strength for women everywhere. Her journey from a dreaming bride to the bride who walked is a masterclass in quiet, calculated courage. Sa lay on her mat and watched the moon. The moon was round and soft like warm bread. Tonight the house smelled of pepper soup and fresh yams. Every room hummed with voices, auntie songs, men's laughter, children chasing lantern light. Sa put a hand on her belly and felt the small drum beat inside her. The baby moved like a tiny bird. She smiled and dreamed of tomorrow when everyone would clap and sing and she would become a bride. Ivy came in like wind, with perfume and small secrets. She sat close and talked gentle words that slid like oil. "Go surprise him," she said like a doctor giving medicine. "Give him the watch now. He will love you more." Sa was tired. The house was loud. Her heart said no, but her cousin's voice pressed on her like rain on dry ground. Sa thought of the watch, a gold circle that held a promise. The idea of a sweet, secret surprise made her eyes fill with warm light. She told herself she would only go for a moment. In the night, she walked out with a white cloth over her head and love singing in her bones. The car lights cut the dark like knives. Sa sat in the Uber and clutched the watch in the cloth. The city at night wore its best clothes. Tall lamps, closed shops, a few people laughing under street trees. Sa felt the baby move and whispered a song her mother used to sing. Her steps were small and brave. She told herself that love walks gentle even when it hurts. The driver asked about the hotel and she answered soft, tired, and sure. At the poolside of the Mirari, glass shone and voices flowed like river songs. The clerk's smile was a careful thing. He told Sa that Osato was in his room but not alone. Those words landed like a heavy stone in warm water, making big circles of fear. Sa's hands became cold. Her heart beat hard but she kept her face like clay, shaped and calm. A small voice inside her said, "Do not ignore this." Yet the same small voice that had wanted to surprise him urged her up the stairs. She climbed with a careful footstep and a mother's need to know. Outside the door, laughter leaked like light under a lid. Sa pressed her palm to the wood and listened. She was not angry in that moment. She was thinking like a woman who keeps a secret for her child. From inside came the sound of two people making light of love, then Osato's voice, small, sharp, and true. "Sa is only for the baby," he said. "If she wasn't pregnant, I would leave." The words scraped the room and left blood behind. Ivy's laugh came next, high and bright, like a bird that had learned to sing lies. Sa's world narrowed until it fit into one small ear. Her breath went slow and careful. She held the watch, but her hands shook enough to drop it. Instead of shouting, she opened her phone and pressed record. She did not cry, she made a choice. For almost 6 minutes she turned hurt into evidence. Each laugh, each cruel word, she kept in the small memory of her phone. In the dark hall, Sa touched her belly and felt the baby kick. This time she touched it like a shield, like an arm around the little life inside. When she left the hotel, the night air seemed to hold its breath with her. On the ride home, Sa did not speak. The city lights slid past her window like pages in a book she no longer wanted to read. Her mouth was dry as the harmattan wind. At a small pharmacy, she bought a memory card, tiny as a grain of rice, and a pen. She backed up the recording like a careful mother storing food for a long journey. She sent one copy to her email and placed another in a small purse. These small acts were not loud, but they were like building a fence around her child. Back in her room, she played the recording again and again. She watched the faces of her family sleep and felt no tears. Grief sat in her like a quiet drum. Sa spoke to her belly, not as a woman broken but as one making vows. "I will protect you," she whispered. "No one will use you to control me." That night she kept watch like a guardian owl. Her mind planned with the calm of someone who knew the rules of a long game. She would not be foolish. She would learn to fight with a steady. Before the sun came up, Sa walked through the house like a shadow that holds light. The women were up grinding beans and mashing yam pottage. They hummed old songs about strength and patience. Sa called Uncle Ifosa, her godfather, a man who carried town respect in the way he folded his wrapper. She told him, in quiet words that did not sound weak, that she needed him to pull his investment from Osato's business. She did not tell him the whole story then, only the part that would make him act. He listened and said, "I trust you." That was all she needed. She called Osaru her lawyer, a sharp man with eyes like dry matchwood. She told him to cancel the marriage license. The papers that would seal her life forever. Undone. He promised to do it before the church bells would even think to ring. A small smile slipped across her face. Ivy came that morning with sweet bread and lies pressed into her hands. S.A. welcomed her with a cup of tea, watched her, and learned how to read guilt in the way someone chews sugar. Everything in S.A. moved quiet and precise, like a river finding its path through stones. On the way out the door, S.A. tucked a small Bluetooth receiver into her bridal bouquet. Flowers and leaves hid the little device like a seed holds a tree. She walked through the compound and pretended to be tired, her face soft and waiting. Her father prayed with the family for mercy and loyalty. He held her hands and spoke words that fell like soft rain. S.A. smiled the smile of someone clever enough to hide a thunderstorm under a white dress. Inside, she felt the long line between truth and lie tighten into a rope she could climb. Osato stood tall in a suit, like a king wearing a borrowed crown. People looked and praised and clapped. Ivy stood nearby like a sister, too close for a cousin. S.A. watched them by the window first, like a bird learning the patterns before it flies. Her heart did not break then, it sharpened. She had a plan that would change the marrow of their lives. She had built small armies made of friends, law, and a single recording. Today would not follow the old script. She would write a new ending. The church was full of pillows of sound. The choir sang in rounds that made the rafters sway. S.A. walked in with the dress that 1,000 hands had sewn like a prayer. Her steps were steady and the world seemed to slow so every face would have time to learn the new story. Osato said his vows in a voice that wanted to be important. People smiled and leaned in. The air smelled like lilies and the sun found each painted face and made it honest. When it was S.A.'s turn, she did not say the small words the pastor expected. She touched the bouquet and the small device began to speak. Through the speakers came laughter and cold words. The room folded in and gasped like fish pulled from water. S.A.'s voice was calm and clear as river glass as she told them what had happened. "This is what he said last night," she said. "He called me nothing but a baby basket." The sound of the recording ripped the holy hush into a new shape. Ivy stood like a reed in wind, her face colorless. Osato's mouth opened, then closed. S.A. dropped her ring onto the floor like a stone and walked out with the choir singing a song she had asked them to. Outside the church, people talked with loud mouths and sharp eyes. Osato's mother came forward, face like burnt banana peel, and the shame in her voice was a small drum that grew louder. Uncle Ifosa had already moved. His bank calls and paper moves pulled the pillars under Osato's business. The man who paid to look important now had his accounts closed. Word runs like a river in town. By dusk the market women had already told the story and folded it into their gossip. Ivy ran and people watched her go. She tried to say the right things but mouths remembered the recording. Shame stuck to her like wet clay. S.A. stood in the sun and spoke to the small gathering and later to the press that came like crows. "I came in a dress," she said, "but I leave with my head." The words landed and echoed. They were short and bright like spear tips. S.A. felt something loosen in her chest. Not sorrow this time but a strange, peaceful strength, like a field after rain. Days passed and the story lived like a seed that kept growing. S.A. started to write. First she made a small page on the internet, a place to put songs and small letters for women who felt alone. People wrote back like birds returning to a nest. "You give us courage," one woman said. The page turned into a blog, then a group, then a small foundation with a thatched roof of hope. S.A. called it The Bride Who Walked, but people shouted her name with new pride, S.A. the Brave. When the baby came, her cry filled the room like drumbeats at dawn. She named the child Eat, which means gift. S.A. held her and felt the chain in her chest break clean. She kept speaking in public, not because she wanted fame, but because every woman who had been pushed down needed to see a woman rise. Men who once smiled at Osato now whispered and kept distance. The town changed its map a little because one brave woman chose to walk away and build a home with both hands and a voice that would not be quiet. One rainy evening, long after the wedding that never was, S.A. sat under the mango tree with Eid wrapped in a soft cloth against her chest. The rain beat a gentle drum on the zinc roof, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. Life had become peaceful. No more chaos, no more lies. But peace often calls the past to come knocking. And so it was that Osato appeared at her gate, not in the polished suits he once wore, but in a faded shirt and worn slippers. His eyes had lost their shine, and his voice trembled like a reed in the wind. "Essay, please," he said, his head bowed low. "I came to ask for forgiveness. I have lost everything, my business, my house, my name. I thought I was strong, but I was nothing without your trust." He knelt in the muddy ground, the rain soaking through his clothes. For a moment, Essay felt the ghost of her old love, the dream she once held. But it was just that, a ghost. She looked down at Eid, whose tiny fingers gripped her necklace, and she understood that forgiveness was no longer about Osato. It was about peace. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said softly. "But it wasn't for you. It was for me." She turned and walked back into her compound, leaving Osato kneeling in the mud, a man who had built his house on lies and watched it crumble to dust. As the months rolled by, Essay's story spread beyond her town. Women whispered her name at market stalls, elders spoke of her courage at evening fires, and even young girls carried her words like charms around their hearts. The bride who walked, they called her. The mother who rose. Invitations began to pour in. Churches, schools, and women's circles asked her to speak. She accepted them all, not for fame, but because every story she told planted seeds in the hearts of those who heard. At one gathering, a woman stood up with tears in her eyes. "I was going to end my life," she confessed. "But then I saw your story. I saw how you walked away with nothing but your dignity, and it gave me strength. I left my abusive husband. I started over. Thank you." Essay held the woman's trembling hands and felt the weight of purpose settle gently on her shoulders. This, not revenge, not shame, was her true mission now, to turn her pain into a lantern for others stumbling in the dark. With her growing influence, Essay founded a council, a circle of women from all walks of life, farmers, teachers, widows, and young girls. They met under the shade of a large baobab tree, where stories were shared like food and plans were made like woven mats. Together they launched projects, safe houses for women fleeing abuse, free legal clinics, and workshops on self-worth and financial independence. One day, an old woman named Mama Titi spoke words that would guide Essay's next steps. "A tree that shades only itself is no forest," she said. "You must plant many trees." Essay understood. It was not enough to heal her own wounds, she needed to build systems that healed others too. And so, she partnered with community leaders, lobbied local chiefs, and even spoke before government councils. The work was hard, but with every victory she saw the world shift, even if only slightly, toward justice. Just as life seemed to settle into a steady rhythm, a shadow returned. Ivy, disgraced, abandoned, and desperate, began spreading lies. She told anyone who would listen that Essay had planned the whole betrayal, that she had trapped Osato on purpose to ruin him. Some believed her. Rumors crawled through the town like snakes in tall grass. Essay's foundation lost a major sponsor. Invitations to speak slowed. The betrayal, it seemed, was not done with her. But Essay had grown wiser. Instead of anger, she chose light. She released the full, unedited recording of that night online, along with a heartfelt message. This is not a story of revenge. It is a story of survival. It is a story of every woman who was told she was nothing, and chose to rise. The truth once again roared louder than lies. Ivy vanished into silence, and Essay's name burned brighter than ever. Years passed. Eid grew into a bright, curious child with laughter like wind chimes and eyes that held both her mother's strength and her father's kindness. One evening, under a sky dusted with stars, Essay told her daughter the whole story, not to fill her heart with anger, but to teach her the value of dignity and choice. "When people betray you," she said, "you have two choices. You can break or you can build. I chose to build." Eid listened with wide eyes, then hugged her mother tightly. "And I will build too," she whispered. That year, Essay's Foundation hosted its first annual Festival of Fireflies, a gathering to celebrate women who had rebuilt their lives after betrayal. Thousands attended, some laughing, some crying, all grateful. As Essay stood on stage holding Eid's hand, the fireflies rose into the night like tiny stars, each one a reminder that even in the darkest times, light always finds a way to shine. 7 years spread their fingers across the sky and let the town change little by little. Essay's hair carried more silver threads now, like river stones polished by time. Eid grew tall and quick, with a laugh that rolled like small drums. She had her mother's strong jaw and her own bright temper. Where Essay once moved with a quiet plan, now she moved with children at her back and a list of tasks in her head. The foundation had grown from a small room to a house with 3 rooms and a yard where women met to braid each other's hair and to speak truth like medicine. Life was not easy, but it was honest. Market mornings smelled of pepper and roasted corn. Essay taught Eid to greet the world with words that sounded like prayer. "Who are you?" she would ask, and Eid would answer, "I am light made by my mother." People began to call Essay Mama Eid, as if being a mother had given her a new name in the town. Yet, the past lived at the edge of her days like a thin shadow. Sometimes at night she would wake and listen for a sound she had not heard in years, laughter where there should not be laughter. She knew that stories never truly ended, they only slept until someone shook them awake. On a bright market day, a boy shoved Eid and called her, the child of a shame. His words were sharp stones thrown by a small hand. Eid's face flushed, and for a beat she wanted to run home and hide inside her mother's skirt. Essay saw this and felt an old drum beat inside her chest. She did not shout or strike. She walked to the boy calmly, took him by the shoulder, and asked him if he had a mother. The boy blinked and muttered yes. Essay smiled and said, "Then you know how heavy shame can be. Carry it with kindness, not with knives." The boy left confused and quieter. Essay taught Eid there are battles you win with words, and there are battles you win by building a life so bright that small stones cannot dim it. A painted sign went up near the big baobab. A schedule for classes, for women to learn money saving, for children to learn how to read and sew. Essay read it every morning like a woman reading weather. The foundation was changing lives in small, sure ways. Mothers learned to make bread they could sell. A widow learned to mind goats and make soap. Eid sat at a small table and helped with letters while playing with a string doll. The town watched this slow change and began to respect the woman who had once caused gossip. Respect grew not because Essay sought it, but because she offered work and warm hands to those who had none. But a new wind blew one day. A man wearing a sharp coat came to the foundation with paper and numbers. He introduced himself as a man who could make the project grow faster. He spoke smooth words about grants and promises. Essay listened. Her heart knew many kinds of lies, and her head had learned how to read them. She asked for time, for more faces in the room to meet the man and to hear what he would offer. Eid watched her mother closely and thought, "My mother is a tree that grows slowly but makes shade for many." The man left with a polite bow, but his eyes lingered on Eid with a look Essay did not like. Mothers have sharp tools made of warning and love. Essay folded her hand over Eid's small one and kept watch. At school, Eid found friends like bright birds. She loved stories about women who became kings and farmers who saved whole families with one harvest. Yet some children still pointed and whispered. They had been fed old rumors that grow like weeds. One afternoon, a girl named Ojo asked Eid in small, brave words whether her father would ever come back to fight for them. Eid's face went small and serious. She said, "I have everything I need." The words were not a lie. But Essay saw worry in Eid's small jaw and knew the child needed more than speeches. She needed a strong heart to borrow when fear arrived. That night, Essay told Eid the story of a woman who planted a mango tree with only one seed and a full basket of hope. The tree did not grow tall overnight, she said, but one day it fed a whole village. "You are my mango seed," she told her daughter. "When the world says you are less, hold the truth like a root." Eid slept, clutching her mother's finger. Essay whispered to the dark, "May you grow without fear, my little one." But the world will try to pull old threads back into the weave. Somewhere, a thin hand was stitching new trouble with old names. A letter came wrapped in a brown paper envelope. No stamp, no return. The words inside were few and sharp: "Stop the council or lose what you have." It was a small paper knife meant to cut like a big one. Essay stared at the letters and felt a cold bloom inside her. She had grown used to angry words, but this had a claim behind it. Someone who wanted power and feared the change Essay brought. She called the council women and read the letter aloud. Their faces hardened like pots set on fire. Mama Titi banged a hand on the table and said, "We will not bow to fear." But even brave pots break sometimes, and fear can come dressed as many small things. Essay decided to answer with light. She painted flyers for more classes, held extra meetings, and spoke with chiefs and town elders. She asked the market women to tell the truth if anyone tried to hurt them with lies. The town slowly began to murmur back. Not every seed of trouble would grow. Yet Essay watched for the shadow that sent the letter. She learned to look for hands behind curtains. Sometimes the enemy does not stand in the center of town wearing a loud voice. Sometimes they slide in like water in a small crack. A new teacher came to the school, a woman from the city with sharp green glasses and a quick laugh. She introduced new games and taught the children to sing in two voices. Eid adored her and learned how to fold paper stars. The teacher, Miss Ada, had a way of seeing what was hidden and brought books that smelled of paint and stories. One evening, she stayed late and told Essay that the school had won a small prize for its reading program. Essay felt a warmth she had not felt in a long time, like a pot slowly filling with stew. But not everyone was happy. The man in the sharp coat returned, this time wearing a smile like a blade hidden behind warmth. He claimed to be a friend to the school and asked Miss Ada for a meeting. Essay watched from a distance and felt a knot. She met Miss Ada and learned the man had promised funds but wanted the school's schedule changed to fit his business hours. He wants the children to work after school, Miss Ada said, frowning. Essay's mouth grew hard as dry earth. No, she said. Children must learn, not work for the greedy. The man smiled like a snake and left. Later that night, Essay burned the paper he left behind. The heat felt good on her hand. On a market morning, someone smashed a jar in front of the foundation. A jar used to hold coins for small repairs. The sound was sharp and rude, and people gathered slow like cattle around bad news. The jar's broken pieces lay like teeth. No one saw who did it, but the town remembered who had eyes like cold stones. Rumors began to spread that Essay was using the money for wrong things. Friends came with angry faces and a small group asked for a meeting with Essay. Her heart beat, but she answered calmly, showing them records and who had used what money. The truth is a slow bird, it sits before it flies. He'd watched her mother and saw her stand like a tree in a storm, steady-rooted and unshakable. The town slowly believed the truth again because when someone shows a paper with names and numbers, it's hard to pretend. The jar was mended by many hands and sewn back with care. The man in the sharp coat cursed the wind that day and walked away with the look of someone who had failed. But small failures can make someone dangerous. Essay knew to trust her fear and not to feel ashamed of it. She taught Ede that fear is a tool. Use it to sharpen, not to paralyze. A stranger came to the gate at dawn with a bundle of papaya leaves and a face full of worry. He said he had worked for Osato long ago and had news that might matter. Essay invited him to sit under the porch and listen. The man told a small, sad story. Osato had left town years ago and had been living in another city, very sick and very poor. He said Osato had tried to find Essay months back but was turned away by shame. Essay felt no triumph, she felt a tired sadness. The man's words made her think of forgiveness and how it opens a space inside a heart like a clean room. That evening, someone from the city sent another letter. It said that Osato had died quietly in a bed no one wrote songs for. The town whispered. Some people came to Essay to put their hands on her shoulder and say things like, "You were right, and you are strong." Essay felt a small hollow open and then close. She went to the river and threw a small stone, watching the little circles spread. She whispered a prayer for the man who had once loved badly and hurt many. She did not want vengeance in her mouth, she wanted peace. The world gave her the kind of quiet she had been building slowly. Peace did not sit long. A woman arrived with a child who looked like Ede, same stubborn chin, same quick eyes. She said the child's father had been in the city and left a box with papers and a name that looked like Osato's. The woman wanted help to read the papers. Essay opened the box and found a letter written in a shaky hand. The words made her breath still. The letter said Osato had left money and a small patch of farmland to any child who could prove they were his. For a small town, land is like having the sun in your pocket. Word spread like dry grass on a windy day. People came with eyes that looked like they held cheese, growing greedy, soft with chance. Some whispered that Ede should claim the land, that money would make life easier and allow the foundation to grow faster. Essay felt the old drum again, a warning drum. She knew money can heal, but it can also make small hearts trade truth for gold. Ede listened and said she did not want the land if it meant people would fight. The town argued quietly. A group of men came to talk to Essay, their voices like weighed coins. They asked her to think like a leader. Essay thought of Mama Titi's words, "A tree that shades only itself is no forest." She knew choices often ask you what you are willing to lose to gain a little more light. Essay called the council and opened the papers. The letter from the city looked like a map with a sad signature. The council weighed the options. Some wanted to accept the gift and share it with the foundation. Others feared a new war over land. It sat close and watched the grown-ups. She held her small wooden carving and felt its smooth head press into her palm. In the end, Essay did something the town did not expect. She asked for proof that the child was truly Osato's. She wanted truth, not rumor. People grumbled, but they could not fault her. Honesty was the first rule in her house. They found the truth slowly. A woman from the city checked records, a man with papers checked dates, and a cousin from another town asked questions like a careful dog sniffing a trail. The child turned out not to be Osato's. The name had been borrowed by someone with a need. The town sighed like a long wind. The land remained empty for now. Essay taught Ede that every gift is a test. Will you take it and lose something, or will you wait and keep your heart whole? Id learned to wait. She learned that sometimes saying no is a way to keep many streets safe. Seasons turned their pages like careful hands. The foundation grew steadier and the school sang louder. Id learned to sew a shirt in a day and to read a page in the night lamp. The town began to notice the small things. Women smiling more, boys carrying less anger, and market stalls with new goods. Essay found time to plant a small herb garden and to bake bread that tasted like home. She walked through the town with a woven basket and a quiet smile, collecting stories the way birds collect small, bright shells. One evening, under a sky heavy with promise, a thin woman came to the foundation carrying a small offering, a pot of stew and a tale. She knelt and told Essay about a boy she had met who had once stood in a hotel room and spoken lies. The woman's voice was soft. She was not asking for vengeance. She only wanted a place to stay. Essay looked at her and saw that people are like rivers. Sometimes they carry stones and sometimes they carry seeds. She made a pot of stew and an empty bed. The town was large enough for mercy, she believed, as long as mercy came with rules and growth. Id watched and felt a strange heat in her chest, not anger but the slow bloom of wisdom. The secret phrase is pen and paper. A thin letter arrived on a hot morning. The envelope was heavy and smelled faintly of city oil. Essay opened it with hands that had learned to be careful. The paper said Osato had come back. He wanted to meet his daughter and he wanted to take it away to the city. The words were simple, but they carried a long train of danger. Essay read the letter twice, then 3 times, as if a meaning might fall out the more she looked. Her mouth stayed closed. Her heart did not jump. It tightened like a rope pulled slow. Essay called the council women and they gathered under the old baobab. The sun made the circle a ring of bright light. Mama Titi held the paper and frowned until her forehead made 2 deep lines. He has no right, she said. He ran away. He spoke like a small man who does not know how to hold his words. But laws are not always kind like mothers. Sometimes paper can say heavy things and the town must listen. Essay decided not to be afraid of the paper. She walked to the town chief and the small government office in the city. She would fight with law, with truth, and with the sound of many feet. She told the children to keep playing and told Id that grown people sometimes make storms. Id nodded, but her eyes turned as old as a river. She had seen storms before. When the lawyer Osato came, he wore the same tired suit but his eyes were bright. He told Essay that Osato had filed for custody and for visitation rights. He said Osato claimed to have changed and that he had new money and new friends. Essay heard the words and felt the air move like it did when someone strikes a drum. She knew money could buy many doors, but it could not buy the truth. Osato began to build a plan. He filled forms, he spoke with the town clerk, he wrote letters and made copies. Essay watched him and understood that this would be a long road, and that on the road people might try to trip them with small lies. At home that night, Essay held Id close and told her, "Some men come back to take what they never cared for. We will not be taken." Id slept after a little while, her small hands splayed on the blanket like tiny shields. Essay prayed in a low voice, not loud and not showy. She whispered to the ancestors' pictures on the wall, asking for wisdom and steady feet. The fight had begun and it wore the face of a letter. Osato appeared in town wearing a clean shirt and a face that tried very hard to look honest. He walked past the market like a stranger who had read how to act in a play. Some people spat quietly and kept their distance. Other people, who remember when a man wore fine cloth, stared with slow eyes. He came to the foundation and stood at the gate, his voice a smooth thing when he spoke to Essay. "I am here to be a father," he said. "I have changed. Let me help." His words laced like sweet tea. Essay answered with a calm that was colder than his smile. She let him speak and did not shout. The town watched and some even offered him water, because we are a place that gives drink before judgment. But not all faces show their teeth at once. Behind Osato stood a man with a bag of papers and promises. The man's name was Mr. Kalu, a city friend Osato said would help with school fees and legal trouble. He spoke of documents, of bank notes, and of lawyers who could make the process fast. Essay knew that money often makes quick friends. She also knew that the law has doors that look the same from both sides. She accepted a meeting in the small hall and invited the council women and Osato. The room smelled like dust and the skin of old wood. Osato talked about how lonely he had been, about how the city had changed him, about how he had many regrets. He told a story that wanted to make him small and soft like bread, but his words left sticky marks on the floor when he left. That night, gossip rolled like a small drum through the market. Some people said Essay should take the money and let the man be father. Others shouted that no money could fix a broken promise. Essay listened to both sides. She felt the weight of choice on her chest. She called Miss Ada, the teacher, and asked her to watch it at school and to tell the truth of what the child wanted. Miss Ada promised, and she gave Essay a quick, firm look. In the moonlight, Essay stood on the porch and felt the air like a hand. She knew this battle would not end with talk. It would need truth and proof, patience and the help of many who carried the town's memory. A new voice came into the story. He said he had been with Osato in the city and could tell the truth. He came with a slow walk and a small notebook. His name was Jide. At first Jide seemed like a helpful thing, a witness who could tell a judge that Osato had finally learned to be a man. He told stories of Osato's clean room and of his good job. He spoke with eyes that looked like they wanted a reward. Essay watched him and felt a prick. Osato met Jide and asked careful questions. Jide's hands shook once when he lied. A lie will shake a hand sooner or later. Essay asked for proof. She asked for bank slips, work letters, and for someone in the city to stand and say Osato had really changed. Jide grew quiet. Mr. Kalu smiled less now. The town began to whisper about witnesses that came from the city with smooth faces. Essay's history taught her to look under the smooth skin. She sent someone to quietly check Jide's name. That small act found a loose thread. Jide had once been seen in a group with men who took money and promised returns that never came. The town had a memory that remembers faces, even when city winds try to wash them away. When Essay brought this to the council, some people turned their faces. Others crossed their arms and said, "We told you money makes sharp friends." Osato stood and his mouth made an empty sound, like a drum without skin. The judge's office in the city was not yet a battleground, but small cracks were forming. Essay felt both fear and an odd calm, the kind that comes when you see a path through a forest and know which roots to step on. In the night, Essay dreamed of a chest buried under the floor. She woke and thought of the papers she had seen years before when Osato's business partners came to the house. The thought made her uneasy. She asked Uncle Ifosa quietly for help. He was a man who kept small records in neat books, and his mind remembered numbers like songs. They looked through old receipts, old letters, and old bank slips. The search was patient. Sometimes the truth sleeps under a pile of dust and waits for someone brave to find it. They found something at last, a paper that had been misfiled long ago. It was a ledger from years back showing how Osato's business borrowed money and how many times payments stopped. The ledger had signatures and a stamp from a bank in the city. The paper told a story of a man who had built big words on small work. The ledger did not speak of change but of habit. Essay made copies and gave one to Osato, and another to the town clerk who kept records. When the town saw the paper, some faces changed color. Old respect leaked away like water from a cracked pot. Osato's reply came fast and sharp. He said the papers were old and that people change. He called Ifosa a liar and the ledger a plot. The town split in small voices. Essay stood steady. She asked for more proof of Osato's new life. She wanted bank receipts from the last 3 years, certificates of work, and a man who could swear in court that Osato had stayed in the same place. The judge would like facts, not songs. The paper chest had been found, but many more boxes were closed. The fight would demand long patience and the kind of courage that keeps quiet while storms pass. A newspaper came from the city with a long article. Its title showed Osato smiling, his hand resting on a city man who promised help. The paper also had small words about Eid and how a father had finally come back for his child. The article was like a mirror that can make a face look kind or cruel depending on how you hold it. People in town read it and some believed it. The world outside was not the same as the town inside the baobab. City papers can cut stories in half and show only the sweet side. Essay took the paper to the foundation and read it aloud at a meeting. "The world will try to show you one face," she said. "But we must look at both." She asked Miss Ada and Osato to help her collect proof from the city, job records, address plans, and witnesses who would stand under oath. The council gathered small savings and paid for a trip to the city to check facts. The trip found that Osato lived in a small room under a man who did not like his noise. He had not been the father the paper said. The city man named Mr. Nwachukwu said Osato had left many debts and small promises. The judge listening to the files in the city would want real proof, not headlines. The press started to come to town. Cameras are loud like birds that wake many simple things. Some reporters saw only the drama and not the truth. Essay spoke clearly to them and asked them to hold their hands with care. She told the story of a woman who had chosen peace many times. The cameras left with things to say, and the town was left with the slow work of truth. When the court day came, the city looked big and gray and serious. Essay sat with Osato and the council women behind her. Eid held Miss Ada's hand and did not let go. Osato stood with Mr. Kalu and Jide and a pile of papers that tried to make a house out of thin air. The judge wore a robe that made him look like a stable tree. He asked questions with a voice that did not rush. He wanted dates, addresses, and handwriting that did not vanish. Witnesses came. Some said Osato was a changed man. Others told the truth that he had left town and people to the wind. Ifosa spoke and told of money pulled and promises kept. The ledger lay on the table like a sleeping animal that someone had woken gently. When Jide stood to speak, his voice quivered. Osato asked him for details and Jide could not keep the story whole. The judge frowned and made notes. The court is a place where lies find small holes to hide in, but holes can grow if you put a finger in them. On the final day, the judge asked Osato why he had left in the first place. The question stung like a bright thorn. Osato's answers felt like thin cloth stretched over a pot of hot water. Small steam and nothing to hold. The judge listened and asked for proof that Osato could care for Ide. Proof is not love spoken smooth, it is work done day after day. The judge told both sides to return with more files and to think of the child's best life. The case would wait. Issei and Ide went home with tired feet, but with a small hope that truth walks slowly but surely. When the court paused, someone close betrayed them. Ivy came back to the town with a small bag and a face that had lost her earlier shine. She came smiling at first, saying she wanted to help. But her small words slipped into other ears. She told a different story in private to a few men, that Issei had planned the whole thing to gain fame. She told Osato that Issei had kept money she should have given. These words were like small snakes, quiet but enough to make people scratch. Ivy's betrayal cut not because it was loud but because it came from someone who had once been near like grain on a mat. Issei felt the old pain like a bruise waking. She did not shout. She called Ivy to the foundation and gave her a place to sit. People watched. Ivy's eyes darted like a child searching for a sweet. Issei asked her why she had come and why she had told half-truths. Ivy answered with small lies and said she had been confused and afraid. The council women spoke. A family can forgive but truth must stand, Mama Titi said. Ivy left the meeting with her head low and a small plan to go back to the city. The town watched her go. Issei knew betrayal would come in many coats. This one had come in a thin one called Old Friend. She taught Ide that some people will try to take your light and call it their work. The lesson was bitter but it made Ide grow a little older in one day. The foundation lost a sponsor and a small part of it saved money when someone used a forged signature. The news made a raw sound in Issei's chest. She held a meeting and showed the town the proof of the forgery. Some of the young men volunteered to guard the books. Miss Ada and Osato helped create a public ledger that anyone could see. They put the names and numbers on the wall so the town could watch. When light shines on a place, thieves find it harder to hide. Ide saw grown men and women work with speed and care. She saw how a community can become a shield around one house. The people who had once said small things against Issei began to bring rice and small coins. The foundation did not die. It learned to be stronger. Issei made a rule that all money would be counted publicly and that every decision would be open. The rule made some people angry but most people felt safer. When trouble comes to a town that knows its own heart, the trouble must step carefully. That night, Issei lit a small fire and invited the council women to sit. They spoke of trust and of how to keep truth loud. They sang a soft song about the moon and a seed that must be watched. Ide slept by her mother's foot and dreamed of a life that would not be taken. The fire stayed small and warm and clean. The town learned that fire can hurt, but it can also clear the ground for new crops. Many papers arrived at once. Affidavits, letters, bank checks, and a long note from someone far away who said they could help. The court called for a final hearing and the city smelled of hot cement and 1,000 small feet. Issei and Osato and Miss Ada packed their bags and took the bus. Ide held a small doll and watched the road. She felt grown in a way she did not like and liked at the same time. At the hearing, more witnesses spoke. Some spoke of Osato's problems with money and others spoke of his small kindnesses long ago. The judge read the ledger and the forged paper and then asked a final question. What is best for the child? The answer does not always live with the loudest man. Sometimes it lives in a small room where someone reads at night and holds a child when it is scared. Issei's proof of care, the foundation, the school, the story that had become medicine for many, was weighed. The judge looked at Ide and asked her a simple question about her school and her friends. Ide answered with a clear voice that held both fear and strength. When the judgment came, the judge said that Ide should remain with her mother and that Osato would have a limited right to visit if he could show real work and steady home proof. The judge wanted to protect the child from whirlwinds and from men who promised things and then left. The decision was a quiet drumbeat of relief. S.A. cried softly and he'd laughed with a small nervous sound. The town that waited at the gates clapped and sobbed. It was not a victory over one man alone. It was a victory for the slow work done by many hands. The bus smelled of oil and sweet bread. S.A. and Ede sat close, hands locked like two small boats on a calm sea. The city rose up like a giant of glass and metal, far different from the red earth and palm trees back home. S.A. felt old and new at once. She had walked many roads, but this one felt like a different kind of test. The foundation had won a small grant, and with it came a meeting in the city about building a training center for women from many towns. That was the light. The trouble came from the people who stood near the light and wanted to control where it shone. They found a small hotel near the river. The room had clean sheets and a window that watched the city like a quiet bird. S.A. laid out the papers the grant group had sent. The name of the organization that offered help was big and shiny. Their letter spoke of building, of money, of fame. But the city also sent a man, a powerful man with a sharp suit and a name that sounded like a bell. He came with his own team and many smiles. He said his group could help the center grow faster if he could have the right to choose the leaders. He wanted a voice that could shut down councils that did not please him. He'd listen like a small tree feeling a new wind. She felt unsure. S.A.'s heart listened too. She had learned that some smiles hide a hook. The man's promises sounded like soft drums, but S.A. remembered how easy it was to trade truth for quick gold. The city meetings were full of people who liked big ideas that fit into thin pockets. S.A. had to move like a chess piece, slow and careful. She asked for time and for more eyes from the foundation to read the papers. The man frowned as if his clock had been slowed. That was the first sign that this new fight would come from power that lived far away and wore many faces. The city had many rivers and one of them ran with markets and small boats. S.A. and Ede walked along the river to clear their heads. They met a woman named Mrs. Amaka who worked with many charities. Her voice was kind and steady like a drum that keeps a song. She told S.A. that the city man's group had done good in some places, but not in all. They build tall things that the wind can break, she said. They like control more than care. S.A. listened and asked for proof. Mrs. Amaka showed receipts and contracts from towns where promises had broken like glass. S.A. realized the fight was not only for money. It was for how the future would be shaped. If the city man chose leaders, he could bring people who would obey him and not the town. S.A. thought of her council women under the baobab, the way they counted coins in public and taught children to read. The thought frightened her. She had built a small web of trust. The city man wanted to redraw it with his own hand. Ede held her mother's sleeve and asked, "Will they take our school?" S.A. wiped her face and said, "They might try. But we will stand like a wall." That night, they made a pact with the river. They would go to the big meeting with truth in their hands and the town's voice in their mouths. The day of the city meeting burned hot. Large rooms and long tables made S.A. feel small, but her eyes were sharp. The city man sat with people who had many titles. He spoke of scale and numbers, words meant to make grown people dizzy. S.A. raised small points: who would run the center, how money would be checked, and how the women from small places would keep their voice. Each question was a stone thrown into a pond. The ripples were small but real. The man answered with charts and a smile that would not break. He offered more money if they agreed to his leadership. Some city people nodded. They liked big numbers. But other groups in the room watched too, smaller groups that had seen many promises and few truths. Mrs. Amaka stood and told a quiet story about towns that had lost their voices. Her words moved some faces. Ede sat at S.A.'s feet and drew a small picture of a tree with roots. When it was S.A.'s turn, she spoke with the simple voice of someone who had seen the work of small hands. She said the center should belong to the people it served, not to the man who wanted to grow his name. It was not a loud speech, but it had weight like a stone that will not roll. The city man's smile changed when the group refused his demand to choose leaders. He left the room and returned with people who held small folders. The folders were full of papers that accused S.A.'s foundation of past mistakes, small errors lifted into large accusations. Some were true, simple bookkeeping errors. Others were lies. The city men used the papers like horns to call trouble. It was a first strike to frighten others. People who had been unsure stepped back. Some promised to leave if the fight grew. S.A. felt the air tighten like a rope. She called her team close and said, "We will answer with truth, not with anger." They brought records, names, and receipts. Miss Ada and Osaro stood and showed the ledger that proved their work. But fear had a way of spreading. The city man put a heavy condition on his help. Either they let him choose leaders now, or he would withdraw all support and force the funders to freeze the grant. Many small towns needed the money. The room smelled of choices that cut. Sa looked at Eid and saw the child's face full of trust. She made a choice that night. She would not bow to threats if bowing meant losing the people's voice. After the meeting, small whispers crawled back to the town like ants. The city man used his friends in the press to spread stories that Sa's group was corrupt. He paid writers to make short, loud tales. The story grew and changed like a river passing stones. The town woke up to strangers asking questions. Some of the foundation's partners were cold and afraid. The school lost a small sponsor and someone threatened the market women who gave coins. Sa felt the sting of isolation. This kind of war used gentle tools. A doubt here, a rumor there. It did not need sharp swords. He'd watched the town's faces grow worried. She asked, "Will they close the school?" Sa held her and said, "Not if we hold hands." They started to fight back with light. The council posted all receipts on the wall. They invited the town to meetings and let people inspect the books. They wrote simple letters to the grant funders and asked real partners to speak. Mrs. Amaka and a few city allies came back and told the truth to reporters. The truth is slow, but it can be very loud when it stands beside witnesses. The whisper campaign lost speed, but its teeth had bitten hard. Some friends left. Sa learned that when power smells like money, loyalty can be fragile. In the noise, a quiet helper came forward. He was a young city clerk named Daniel who worked for the same fund group. He had read the man's private emails and saved them. Daniel was afraid to speak, but he had a clear heart. He came to Sa and said, "I saw lies in their papers." He showed her messages that proved the city man had plans to take control. The messages were small but cutting. Offers to remove leaders who would not obey, plans to give contracts to men the city man favored. Daniel risked much by handing over the truth. Sa felt both relief and fear. With Daniel's papers, they could show that the attack was planned. But the city man could fight harder. Sa and Osaro took the evidence to neutral funders and to a lawyer in the city who agreed to help. The town rallied behind them, and Mrs. Amaka put her name to a public statement. The city now watched a small fight that had roots in the village. Power had met a different kind of force, honesty and people who would speak. Daniel's courage became a small lantern in the long night. The case moved to a public hearing. The room filled with people from many towns, cameras, and men who liked to see power fight. The city man's team had their charts. Sa had the truth. Daniel came and sat quietly, his hands shaking. The lawyer spoke simple things. The fund must protect the voice of those it serves. He read the private messages and showed how the city man had planned to remove leaders and take control. The crowd gasped like leaves in sudden wind. But there was a new thing too, respect that was not loud but steady. Nearby towns now called to ask how Sa had kept her voice. Grants came slowly from groups that wanted honest work. Mrs. Amaka and Daniel became partners who visited often. The training center would be smaller at first, but it would belong to the people. Sa taught Eid to count coins and to say no when something did not feel right. The girl learned the rhythm of work and patience. The city's bright lights now had a small mark of their own in the town's map. Months passed and the training center opened small doors. Women from 3 towns came to learn sewing, reading, and small business. They brought food and songs. The ribbon was cut with simple scissors and many small hands. Sa stood with Eid and thought of the river pact, the bus ride, and the many nights of counting coins. The city had tested them. The city had shown that power can be loud and hungry. But it had also shown something else, that courage, truth, and the small light of many people can temper a bright and greedy plan. Eid looked at her mother and said, "We did not let them take our tree." Sa smiled and pressed a small coin into the girl's hand. "We grew it together," she said. The training center would not be large and flash, it would be a place with roots. The city still held many storms, but the town had sent a seed that would not be stolen. The flame for tomorrow burned steady and low, ready to grow with care. Long before any cradle was rocked in Bethlehem, before shepherds watched their flocks under starlight, before a carpenter's workshop echoed with the cry of a newborn child, a promise was spoken into the silence. For unto us a child is born. It was not just a prediction. It was a declaration that hope was on its way. And that is where our lesson begins. For centuries people waited, tired, burdened, stumbling under the weight of their mistakes and fears. They watched kingdoms rise and fall, leaders boast and fail, dreams bloom and die. And still they waited. Some grew bitter in the waiting. Some stopped believing altogether. But some, a faithful few, held on to the promise. And then in the humblest corner of the earth, hope arrived. Not as a warrior with a sword. Not as a king on a throne. But as a baby, small, fragile, and unnoticed by the powerful. That single moment teaches us the first great truth. Greatness often enters our lives quietly. The biggest answers rarely come wrapped in thunder and fire. They come in whispers, in moments we're tempted to overlook. If we're always searching for the spectacular, we might miss the sacred hiding in the ordinary. The second lesson is this: a promise kept is stronger than a problem faced. Every prophecy about the coming child was a promise, that darkness would not win, that despair would not last, that humanity was not forgotten. And every fulfilled word reminds us that no matter how long it takes, truth does not lie and light does not fail. You may be waiting for your own prophecy, a dream, a breakthrough, a healing, a change. And maybe the wait feels endless. But this story proves that what is promised will arrive, not on our schedule but in perfect time. There's a third, even deeper lesson. Our worth is not defined by power but by purpose. The promised one did not come surrounded by soldiers but by shepherds. He was not born in a palace but in a place meant for animals. The world measured him as insignificant, but heaven measured him as everything. And that truth applies to you. Your beginnings, no matter how small, humble, or hidden, do not limit your destiny. What defines you is not where you start but what you are meant to become. Fourth lesson: love is the most revolutionary force on earth. The prophecy wasn't fulfilled through might or fear. It was fulfilled through love. Love that stepped into human history, love that walked among the broken, love that carried burdens not its own. It reminds us that the most powerful thing you can do is to love, when it's hard, when it costs you something, when no one is watching. Love has the power to rewrite stories, heal wounds, and redeem even the darkest moments. And finally, the story gives us one more truth, perhaps the most important. We are part of the promise too. For unto us a child is born. Not unto the powerful, not unto the perfect, unto us. That means the story was never just about a baby in a manger. It was about what that baby would grow to give the world: peace for the restless, purpose for the wandering, and hope for the hopeless. We are the reason the promise was made. And now we are the carriers of that same light, called to be hope in hopeless places, to speak life into broken hearts, and to remind a weary world that the story isn't over. Never doubt the power of a promise. Never despise small beginnings. Never measure your worth by the world's standards. And never forget that even in silence, even in waiting, even in darkness, light is coming. Just as it did then. Just as it still does now. And just as it always will.